Happy to be here with my very special guest this week, actress, author, producer, writer, and fellow podcaster, Jaime Andrews. Jaime, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing, Derek? Nice to meet
Doing
you.
good. Yeah, nice to meet you as well. We were just talking off air. You're actually in the middle of traveling, so definitely thank you for taking the time to do the podcast.
Oh, of course. No, I really enjoy your show and I wanted to make sure I could meet with you when you wanted me to.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. So I always like to ask this question first because, for the majority of the interviews I do, I talk with actors, directors, writers. There's never really a set way to get into the industry. There's not like a how to guidebook. So, what was it that made you want to get into the crazy world of entertainment?
Well, it's very funny because, I know a lot of people that have a moment in their life where like, this is what I want to do. And it wasn't that way for me. It was just always what I did. Like they made me the lead of the kindergarten show, the first grade show. Ben Franklin came to our school. He needs an assistant. Throw Jamie up there. like it was kind of an imperative. I had no choice but to just roll with it. And the idea never wore off. But actually getting into it has been just the longest road. And I think that's great because, you don't take anything for granted that way. But, I started with, as a lot of actors do, with like commercial print. And then it went to commercials, then it went to TV, then movies. It's been a long circuitous road.
And it's been great to read your story because you've really done a little bit of everything. Like you mentioned, being in commercials, you've acted, you've done some writing, and you've kind of dabbling in a little bit of everything. And I find that a lot of actors become fascinated with how things work behind the camera. So has it been, from the beginning, even though you've primarily been acting, were you always curious about what would happen behind the scenes? There's a lot that goes into making a film or an episode of a TV show.
Right. Honestly, I wish I'd been more curious about it earlier because I was writing when I was very young, bad poetry, but still writing. And I wrote this fake TV show about a pirate when I was in junior high. like, if I'd pursued that, I think it would have made me a more well rounded actor, but I was just tunnel vision on acting at the time. And eventually I realized it wasn't satisfying enough to me that I need those other outlets to feel more complete, um, to exercise those parts of me. I've been so much happier since I started creating my own work. And I know you say actors always want to know the other side of the camera. I did always say, I don't want to direct though, because I think there's so much involved technically that I don't have as much of an understanding of. But sure enough, I just wrote this thing and I'm like, God, I could see it in my head. I really would like to direct that. So
It's
it happens to the best of us, or all of us, if not the best.
and it's one of those things that you don't really know if you're going to enjoy it or not unless you actually do it. I've directed a couple of shorts that I've made locally here where I live in Pensacola,
Oh,
and
cool.
it can be very stressful at times because it's like everyone's looking at you and depending on you to you know make the tough decisions if you need to. But there's a certain gratifying feeling that once you do it, you're like, I could do it again. Even if you're like on the most stressful thing ever, you could be like, you know what? I could do another movie. That's how you know that you love it.
It's almost like they say it is for women giving birth, that you forget how difficult it was and want to do it again anyway. Yeah, I mean, as a director, I haven't done it, but there's no one else to answer to. So yeah, it's all on your shoulders. And I think that scares me because when we did my movie Division, I was executive producer, so I had my hands in a lot of things. But I remember we had a stumbling block one day, and I was like, I don't know how to deal with this. And like my head was exploding a little, and the director just went in and just so incisively turned that moment around. I'm like, no, I was too emotionally involved. He was able to be dispassionate and figure out how to deal with that situation.
That's actually an excellent segue because that was what I was going to ask you about next. You produced, wrote, and starred in the film Division, which has done quite well in the film festival circuit. So, what was kind of the inspiration behind the film?
Well, I'm a very political person, and it's a very political film. Although I was excited to hear that it's called Division, but I look at both sides in a fair way. So that was I was happy to hear that because I wasn't sure that I could be dispassionate in that situation. But both sides are human, and so I think without facing it that way, it wouldn't have made as much of an impact, because you can't stereotype one side or the other. We all are coming from very real places with our beliefs. And so I was inspired by the election of 2020. I thought it was a really scary time. Obviously, we couldn't leave our houses. So, so I put my downtime to use writing that story inspired by both my life and the current events.
And you're giving me flashbacks to that time because I remember, in addition to the world shutting down, we have this election going on where it's regardless of what side you're on, it's causing so much divide and hate between people. At the job I worked at the time, there were people that were hardcore on one side and hardcore on the other, and it was like pulling teeth to get them to work together because
Wow.
that was just it was that extreme. And I haven't had a chance to watch the film yet, but I did watch the trailer, and it looks really fascinating because it took me back to that time. We're going on 4 years now that happened, but on one hand, it still kind of seems like yesterday. But I, I think the story that you crafted is really good, and you throw in the time period and the the two main characters and their beliefs. I think makes for a really fascinating story.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so proud of it. I remember the first festival we were at, the programmer was like, this movie is important. And I was like, to hear that is so gratifying when you just did something because you felt like you had to do it. I felt like I had to make this statement that came out of me really easily. And so to hear that it's received well is, I can't even tell you, especially with the upcoming election. I hope that it gets in front of more people, because it does have something to say, and I I think it does so in a powerful way. I hope.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Where did you guys shoot it?
It was, well, because it was the pandemic, I wrote a really small film. It's mostly shot in my house on the block where I live. Then the other location was my producer's house. We had one location that we got, which was this brewery, which was very open. It had outdoor seating, so that we could. And I'm glad we did, because you remember during that time, some of us would venture out. Can we go this place? Is it safe? So I know for a lot of people it was difficult to watch because it was like, oh, that was a hard time. But I think going into the future, it'll really be like a time capsule for what that year was for so many of us.
And I've heard some people say that it's still too soon to tackle that time period. I personally don't think so because I think we need to be reminded of where we've come from. And it's even things like from events from the 60s and 70s. We'll look at this like 20, 30 years from now as being one of those times where you will never forget the events of what happened. So I think it is important to document that, and that's why film is so important because
Mhm.
I use this analogy a lot, but As much as I love like great paintings, sculptures, film and TV is the greatest art form to me because it's such a visual representation of the human condition.
I think that's absolutely true. I also think it can move society forward in ways that other mediums can't. It can touch people in the same way other art can, but I think it really shows people themselves and helps people learn about how to move in the world. And it reflects society, and so people are able to grow and learn from it in ways that you can't with other pieces of art.
Absolutely. And especially when you look at a film that on the outside might just be something made for comedy or just escapism, but it makes you think like, huh, maybe I should look at my point of view on, subject A or subject B.
Yeah, I mean, think about Star Trek was has such progressive ideals that people don't even realize they're taking in, and hopefully making a part of their own lives, even though it's not in space.
Yeah, absolutely. And things like, you see futuristic technology from movies that might have been made in like the 70s and 80s, and you see those things being invented now because people watch those movies and are like, hey, I want to make that one day.
Yeah, and how about 2001 Space Odyssey? Hopefully Kubrick wasn't right on with his HAL AI there. That
Uh,
one's
yeah, I tell people that, just watch The Terminator and tell me if AI is really a great idea.
right, right. Oh, it's interesting times we live in. Someone cursed us. May live in interesting times.
Maybe so, yeah. Well, I'm definitely fascinated to see the evolution of that for sure. I mentioned also that you co-host a podcast called the Daniel Baldwin Show with, of course, Daniel Baldwin. So how did that venture come about?
Well, we were on the show World's Dumbest together, which ran for like 7 years. I was on five of them on True TV. And it's a very fun show. It was mostly people making fun of internet videos, and it was celebrities who had fallen on hard times, but also stand up comedians. And I was neither, but I wound up with this job writing jokes about people drunk falling into lakes. Um, and so we had met there, and then he moved to Atlanta to make a movie. And I guess his family really liked it there, and he met his new wife and had a child with her. And so he's settled in Atlanta now. And he put out on Facebook, looking for an on-camera co-host. And I was just sitting there. So I'm like, and he said, yes, you. I don't want to hear from anyone else. It's going to be Jamie. Because we always had a really good rapport. We grew up in the town next to each other. It turned out
Oh,
I worked for his mom in my first job at the mall.
you're kidding.
Did not know this when we
Wow.
didn't know we worked for the Baldwin's mother at Quick Test, taking surveys in the mall. But sure enough, yeah, I don't think we got along, but I get along with Daniel really well. We have a lot of fun. He has a lot to say. Mostly, I think I'm the Robin to his Howard Stern, and I just like, yes, ha ha ha. Or the and maybe I'm Ed McMahon.
That's not a terrible gig to have, though.
Oh no, it's great. I'm having a blast with it. Really, he's a lovely, lovely guy, and he's got a really interesting story. So we're
Yeah,
having a
that
good time. It's only
that's
been a couple
insane that
months. Sorry,
that's insane that you worked with his mom. Like
isn't it
that just
ridiculous?
shows you like life can be so intimate and compact sometimes in the huge world that we live in.
Oh, it's a way smaller world than we give it credit for. That's why whenever I meet someone from somewhere, like I almost did it to you with Pensacola. I have people in Pensacola. It's a small world. It would not surprise me.
Really? That's interesting. Huh. But yeah, I've enjoyed the show. You know, I watched a couple of episodes to prep for this conversation, and I really like the rapport that you two have, and it's always more fun to do a show with someone that you have such a good rapport with. You know, I've seen episodes where it's just you two talking whenever you've interviewed like actors or had a guest on, and it's a really fun show. I dig it.
Oh, thanks. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. Another venture that you've done is you've also wrote a book or a memoir called The Brink. What gave you the motivation to do that?
Well, I always knew I had a crazy story, and I always wanted to get that out there, but mostly because I feel like it could help young women, especially young people or anyone that struggles really, to know that they can get past it, that they can make something of their lives no matter how bad things seem to have gotten, that you can turn your life around. That's what I hope for it most of all. Um, but I saw this. I went to the Edinburgh Festival to do a play, and met this palm reader, and he said, "You're a storyteller. You have to tell your story." And I was like, "Oh gosh, no! It's so bad. This story is so bad. Like my mom won't even read it. She's like, I lived it. Don't need to read it." But it came out of me, so I feel like I needed to share it.
Did you find it to be therapeutic in a way when you were putting words to paper?
Oh yeah, I keep telling people it was like an exorcism. It came out so fast. I think I wrote it in 2 to 3 months, and it was just word vomit. Just came right out. Like I had to do really very little editing in terms of form and content. And yeah, I think it had to be told.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about whether it's something like you mentioned where you have this crazy story, or even if it's something as like a bad incident or a bad memory. There's something to be said about physically writing it down or typing it in a word document or something like that. It is really kind of like it's leaving you, and you're putting it out there, and you're like, okay, it's out there. I'm not going to forget it, but I'm going to move on with my life.
Well, what's interesting is I actually wrote it 20 years ago, but I was scared to put it out because I was trying to be an actor and I didn't want it to get in the way of my acting career. I was like, this is so scandalous. People will associate me with this. And I had this fancy agent that was like, we want to publish this. And I said, no, it would have to be anonymously. And she gave me a proverbial middle finger on that. So so I was like, it can wait, it can wait. And now I guess I feel like I've been very fortunate to have the career I've had. I've made peace with what's in that book. And I feel like there was no use waiting anymore. I really wanted to finally unleash it on the world because maybe when I wrote it, I still had some shame involved with the content. But now I'm so proud of where I've come from where I was.
And you should be, and
Thanks.
I think as I mentioned, there's something to be said about having the courage to put that out there, because not a lot of people do. And I think people can empathize with those that make themselves vulnerable and aren't afraid to tell the truth. So I give you major credit for doing that.
Thank you so much. Well, what do they say? A society is only as sick as its secrets.
Hmm.
I think we should be open books. We should, and I think we're moving toward that. Maybe maybe even too far toward that in some respects. But yeah, I don't think there's anything gained with a society that represses the truth of situations.
I find that to happen a lot whenever society moves in a new direction or a new view on something. it goes a little too extreme, but then pulls back to that happy medium. So I think you're absolutely right. I think we're really starting to see a trend in not being afraid of the truth.
Hmm.
But I think as time goes on, it will be, I don't want to say done in a better way because that's too generic, but it'll be tweaked and modified as time progresses. So,
No, Derek, that's so crazy. I've said the same thing. Like, I feel like we're in a period of overcorrection and then we'll
mhm,
balance out.
yeah,
So, high five. We agree.
virtual high five. Love it. Yeah, it's, I think it's a necessary change in society. And
Yes.
I'm very curious to see where that goes because I know that I don't know if you've heard about it, but Cat Williams, the stand-up comedian, did an interview with Shannon Sharp where he talks about exposing the truth and telling the truth, and it has over 50 million views on YouTube.
Wow.
It's insane, but it's a really enlightening interview, and that gives me, you know, thoughts to this conversation that we're having now.
Okay, I heard about it. I'm gonna have to actually watch it. So, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's pretty
On the
long.
list.
It's like 3 hours long, but it's worth it.
That's a lot of truth.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So, as we start to wrap up here, what's next for you on the horizon? I know you've got your podcast, you've got a successful film, you've got your book. So, what's next for Jamie Andrews?
Well, I'm really excited the strike's over. I'm ready to get back to work. But I also wrote this other screenplay, Hardcore, which finally is something I wrote that's not about me. Most of my writing has been inspired by my life. This is actually inspired by a guy I went to high school with who committed the most atrocious act. And I can't believe it's never been on Dateline or a podcast or something. It's truly shocking. And I wrote a screenplay based on it, and I'm so excited about it. And a lot of people have read it and dig it. So right now I'm putting that in contests, trying to get feelers out to, you know, let's put it out there. By the end of the year, that'll be in the works because I'm super psyched about it. And I don't even, there isn't even a part for me in it. Who am I?
Oh
Writing about
wow.
for other people. Okay, maybe one little part for me.
Yeah, I mean Hitchcock had a cameo in all of his movies, right? So,
You know, it's
you,
me and Scorsese. We're basically the same.
I love it. Yeah, no, you've got me intrigued with that story, saying that it should have been on Dateline. So I'll be there for sure. Uh,
Oh,
I'm
it's a
ready to see
shocker.
it.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll send you preview tickets.
Oh, fantastic! Very cool. So, do you have a website or social media that you'd like to plug so the viewers and listeners can follow you?
Yeah, I've got my website is Jaime Andrews.com. Uh, and because my name is a different spelling than usual, my social media is at JMENDREWS. If you look for Jamie Andrews, I'll come up. It's this mug.
Well, and I'll put a link in the show notes
Okay,
when the
cool.
interview's released, so people just one click and they'll be there.
Yay, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. This was awesome.
Oh, such a pleasure, Derek. Thanks for having me.